to you from the Pensado Media Center, powered by Westlake Pro.
Part 2 of our NAMM trilogy. We've got a few important moments with CEO of Avid, Luis Hernandez Jr., plus an in-depth interview with hot mixer Ariel Borujow, a hot ITL, a NAMM recap video. You're at the place.
Pensado's place!
Rockin'. Very good. Give yourself a round of applause.
That was great.
So, very quickly, we want to introduce somebody who has, if you think about Avid this way, it's interesting to know which brand is bigger. Is it Avid or is it Pro Tools? That's how synonymous they are with making music, being creative, and they're pushing the envelope on other things. And I want to introduce the chairman and CEO of the company who's really taken it to a new place.
Yes.
So put your hands together for Luis Hernandez Jr. So now the fun part that Luis may or may not know, he did a book called The Storytellers Dilemma that is up for a Tech Award this year, from what I hear. Is that correct?
That's what I hear, too.
And from what I understand...
Wait a minute. He's not competing with me, is he?
So you guys are now have books in the same category competing tomorrow night. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a cage fight.
Super Bowl.
Luis looks kind of buff.
Wait a minute. He's competing?
He's competing. He's got more juice than you do. Give us the impetus for the book, why you wrote it, why it was important.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I heard once you're on this show, you know you've made it.
I'm not sure what you made it to.
Told my mom. Everybody's excited.
Great, thanks.
No, I think Storytellers Dilemma is you know, first of all, Avid is part of, you know, the storytelling community, so we felt, from our perspective, we had an obligation and a responsibility to kind of explain what's happening and help the community move forward.
Right.
You know, storytelling is so important in everything we do. What the book talks about is the role technology plays in the inspirational part of music and other forms of storytelling. The disruption that the digitization is causing, connecting the creator to the consumer, and the economic output of that, and the disequilibrium in the reallocation of money, and specifically to the artist. So if you talk about music as an example, the unintended consequence of this digitization that allows more people to tell a story and more people to hear it is that the artist is a big loser. And we felt that because we're part of the community, we should bring more awareness to this and also try to work together to see if we can navigate in a more constructive way. And so that's what the book has served of. It's done very well, and you know, we have speaking engagements all around the world, which is what we wanted, so we can explain to people what's happening. It's happening from a business side and also consumer side. And you know, we'd like to help be a part of the solution, navigate forward to preserve this wonderful industry that we're in.
Why that's important to all you guys are a number of fronts from our perspective. There is no good content without a good story. And understanding the context of story and how to deliver it, how to make sure all these tools we have don't bog you down as much as they unleash you and they unleash your creativity. And you have to find the balance. We know a lot of people on our show, or that we know, or that we just know through our years in doing it, who sometimes get technology bound and they get handcuffed. And you have to use the technology, not have the technology use you. Is that a good way to sort of put it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And we actually contribute, a lot of people contributed to your book, including us, which is really great. Thank you for that. The other thing about Avid, and the reason that we're such proponents, is that they look at it holistically, not just how to sell you a DAW or software or another thing. So, for instance, you guys recently launched a movement for the industry, correct? What is that movement?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I brought you 2 buttons.
Oh, movement buttons.
The We Are for Music movement buttons.
Cool.
No, I think, you know, it's in line with this. First thing we try to do is, what is the problem we're trying to solve for our community?
Right.
That's the storytellers in the world that are so valued and inspire all of us and part of what we do every day. So that was how the book got started. That's how we think about what we develop and bring to the market from a product perspective. And, you know, when we think specifically about music and the digitization has caused this change in the way the industry works, who makes money and how you make money. And so when we see the disequilibrium in the economics between the artist and the rest of the value chain, we think somebody has to point this out and fight for the rights of artists.
Right.
And there's kind of, everybody needs to get involved. You know, consumers probably don't realize that they unintentionally are incentivizing businesses to pay less to artists. And artists have a responsibility also, and legislators and leaders in the industry, I think, have a role also in changing laws, so it's not okay to steal from artists, and they should be compensated fairly. So we launched this movement. We have a petition. I'll personally be taking it to Capitol Hill to have our voices known. We worked with NAMM yesterday. We worked with Grammys also the day before, and we want to bring awareness out. So if you don't know it, it's the hashtag #WeAreForMusic. Spread the word through your social and try and get as many people to sign the petition.
That's how you get paid. It's important. It helps you get paid.
Louis, music's never been a solo sport. It's always been a collaborative sport, and Avid has always been at the forefront of that, and for that we thank you. I've been using Pro Tools since the early 90s, and I want to give you a compliment. It's been a roller coaster ride with Avid, and the last 2 years under your control, I don't think Pro Tools has ever been healthier, and I've never seen this many improvements and implementations in such a short period of time as under your rules. So for that, I thank you, because I earn a living with Pro Tools.
Thank you.
So tell us about the creative ecosystem. You were kind of describing it a little bit before. We're all parts of it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, essentially, when we stepped back and said, what is the problem? Like, what and how can we help? How should we help? How can we help? And to us, the great thing about digitization is that more people can tell their story, but there's a lot more competition. So there's actually more pressure to tell the best story. But that's just one piece of the problem. So, of course, we have to keep making our tools better and better and easier. And that's why Pro Tools has seen a real resurgence the last couple of years. Just last quarter, our digital and subscriptions online have grown like 70%. And we haven't seen this kind of growth in a long time. The whole company grew 21%. We're a big company. And it's all because we've engaged more deeply with community. So one is we need to double down on making the tools better, number one. Number two, how do we allow you to distribute and get it to as many people as possible? And the problem is the new ways to make money in music are often less attractive or unknown. In no cases are they more attractive except for live venue sales. And third, how do we optimize the value of what you have? This is things like metadata tagging, protecting the asset, securing it, make sure nobody can play it without you knowing. So when we think about, we know most of our artists, they understand what we're talking about, but they really just want to make great music. And it's up to us to fill in the rest. And that's what the ecosystem is about. It's an artist community, so you can meet and collaborate with other people anywhere around the world quickly and easily. But while you're doing that, we're protecting what you're working on. We're tagging it so everybody knows it was you who worked on that session or that lick or that stem or whatever it is. We give you a way to distribute it through our content marketplace, and we allow you to produce using the best tools. So the whole thing comes together globally, and it's up to you on how you want to use it. We have thousands of certified partners who work so it doesn't slow down how you create. Because at the end, just like you said, the joy is in the story that inspires somebody. And you mentioned technology. I'm a technologist. That's what I'm trained. That's what I do. And storytelling has been around before the written word. There were cave drawings and sound. Sound was the first audio-based. And sound today, and we've always incorporated whatever the tools to make the best sound. And it's no different today. So our job is to keep feeding the community the very best tools so that we can experience that joy that music is part of all of us. That's what we try and do with the ecosystem.
We know your time is short. We thank you so much, and let's continue.
Congratulations, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you. Thanks, bud.
How about us bringing up a hit maker? This guy has worked on T.I. and Imagine Dragons and Puffy and, I mean, so many, BB Rex, Chainsmokers, and so on and so forth. We just met him the other day, although we've heard about him. He is a great guy. Let's bring to the stage Ariel Borujow. Where are you, Ariel? Oh, you get the walk-up camera. You get the sexy camera treatment, too. So, where did it all start? What were your earlier influences for you personally as you were starting this journey musically?
I actually started my journey when I was about 8 years old. In elementary school, we actually had choir class, and I refused to do it. So I wanted to man the stereo system, and that's basically how I started getting obsessed with sound. Whether, they had back in the day, we had those tall stereo systems. I'm 41, so I'm not the youngest guy, but we had like a 32-band graphic equalizer, and I started messing with it. I'm sure it didn't sound great, but that was my first obsession with sound.
You look 22.
I appreciate that.
And so usually black don't crack, but you got something extra going with you. So
and I got no makeup either. So
yeah, that's amazing. As you see yourself, are producing part of your chops? Is it mixing? Is it engineering? Is it all of it?
It's interesting because I started as an engineer when I was 17 years old. I went to recording school, decided not to go to college. I went to the Institute of Audio Research, and then I actually started interning 2 weeks into school. Like, I just couldn't sit in class.
Right.
But somewhere along the way, I was learning how to make beats, and we were using like some primitive program, Digital Orchestrator Pro. I don't know if anyone's even heard of this, but it was like very primitive. Started making beats. Also bought an MPC, so I went that route. You know, people who produce have a real knack for it. I mean, I can produce and I can steer a room, and I think part of an engineer's job is really to control the environment, and that means being the silent guy, making sure that everything's running smoothly.
Right.
And I saw myself more in that role, but then mixing became an obsession for me early on.
Oh.
Wake up. Yeah, we're interviewing.
I just got my brain fixed on a quote that he said. It's a bit of a change of pace, but you said that mixing isn't about what to do, but what not to do. And I've been thinking about that since I read it a couple of days ago. Can you expand on that? Because I think that's brilliant. Because it's true.
I think nowadays we all have the same tools, and you know, the people that do know me, I'm completely in the box. Like, I didn't say I gave up on analog, but having the argument of analog and digital is useless to me. It's really the ear, not the gear, right? So what happens is I see a lot of the younger engineers, and you know, I love to mentor younger engineers, and they'll open up a session and they have like their plugins are completely filled up. And then they're like, I just can't get it to sound right. What would you do? And I'm like, well, let's start with nothing on it, and let's blend it in, okay?
Right,
and let's start listening. So it's really, when you first start mixing, you're learning what to do, and the older you get, you're kind of completely dumbing down on all of the tools, and you're using more. It's a lot more balance, a lot more panning, and you know, it took me a little bit to really get comfortable completely in the box, and I stayed in the box. It wasn't because of... it was necessity. My summing box, the left side blew out, and I needed to hand in a mix to EMI within 48 hours, and I couldn't get it replaced. So I literally, true story, is I was mixing the record. I was up for 32 hours. I got home, I had it on my laptop. My wife was sleeping next to me, and I was still mixing because I was like driving myself crazy.
Sure.
And it's, you know, now I'm comfortable 6 years later that I find myself doing a lot less in the box. More on the master bus processing, believe it or not.
For the audience that's watching, sometimes you can get to addition by subtraction.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
In my management days, what I used to always say is that it's not hard to be complex. It's really genius to be simple.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you?
It's something I do all the time without being able to help it. Unintentionally.
But for all you guys out there, sometimes you're doing so much that you're losing where you need to go, and you're not allowing yourself to see that the path is there by just getting rid of... We had the guys from Despacito who produced on yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how simple they do their songwriting and producing.
Most people
And they literally stop working at 6 o'clock. They take lunches, they stop working at 6. When it gets to be too much, they shut it down. So sometimes structure really helps you get to your hits or your best musical self, or to the story we talked about earlier. Very important stuff. We do that same thing on the show. You know, people ask us about the show, and we tell them all the time, it's your story as much as what you do with your gear.
Absolutely.
And we need to know about your story. Anyways.
Neil, you wear a lot of hats. Like, you do the live thing.
Literally.
Yeah, you do the live thing, you track, you mix. It feels to me, and Herb also, that that's the future of engineering, of our profession. It's no longer that you do one thing. You need to do 3 or 4 things extremely well in order to go into the future that provides us income and work. So it's not unusual for a guy like K-Fam to be a good engineer and a good producer. That's a given in today's world, right?
It's funny because, you know, there was a point where, you know, a few friends of mine, we were running a 5-room facility in Manhattan, and I always wanted to interview the interns coming in. And the first thing I said to them, I was like, do you produce? And if they said yes, I didn't want to hire them.
Right.
You know, because we had Just Blaze in the studio with us, and I just assumed that they just wanted to get in with him. But I've literally changed my tune throughout the years because I'm like, you know, I have an assistant that works remotely with me now. He preps my mixes in Memphis, Tennessee, and we're starting to like incorporate the cloud collaboration. You know, we're getting our plugins in line and all that. And it's funny, a client just sent me session, like, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and they really didn't know what to do, and they were in Ableton.
Yep.
So he's an Ableton master. So I was like, just talk to Matt.
Yep.
And big shout out to Matt. And he basically was able to do everything for them, you know?
So that's another point that I think is important for you guys. You can work with anybody anywhere now. You can be at your place and work with somebody in Frankfurt, Germany, or wherever.
I don't see anybody anywhere.
And Dave doesn't either, most of the time. I mean, there's some people, but we'll get a session in, we do a creative call, we line it up, they'll send the stems.
Same.
We'll do the work, send it back, get the end. So the idea is your business is not limited to your locale. Your business is limited to your imagination.
True.
And that's an opportunity to make money that you may not have thought about. You don't have to become a star in Memphis or a star in Austin or even working. If you reach out farther and let people come back to you and allow yourself to be found, allow your work to be found, you'd be surprised. Those checks come through the mail and wire transfer as much as they come by somebody handing you a check. So, and trust me, it's sort of easier when they come by wire transfer.
This is true.
Right?
And you got someone chasing your money, so that's...
Mixing live music on television, what's that like?
It's crazy. I've been doing it for about 13 years. It's challenging. I just do it over the summer. And it's great because, first of all, it exposed me to completely... You know, I've mixed for Andrea Bocelli. I've mixed for Haskell Flats, Def Leppard. I mean, like, the list is crazy.
Wow.
And it's interesting because as picky as you want to be, you literally have about 3 hours to put a show together, if that. So what I end up doing is I record the rehearsal, and then I spend about 2 hours mixing. And sometimes there's people that don't even want to give you a sound check. So the artist will be like, singer's not going to sing at full voice.
Yeah.
So you have to be ahead of that and say, okay, I know that they're going to sing louder. Or I might go on Spotify or whatever and just listen to the song and just make sure, like, okay, they're going to belt at this.
Do you ever have to do 2 artists in the same day? In other words, so have a setup for
Never.
2 different artists? Oh,
It's always one, thank God.
Okay, good.
But instant recall and everything probably would make it super easy to do different snapshots. But it's challenging, but it's fun because it keeps you on your toes. And you know that once you go live, you're like, oh my God. You know?
Does that pay good?
Pays the same week,
Oh.
you know, so that's different.
That's rare.
When I was a touring musician, I got fired a lot because I played really loud, and I like everything in my life. I like really, really
And
loud.
you became a mix engineer.
What's your concept and your stand on loudness as you know, in terms of our profession? You know, this loudness thing. I like loud. Really
I got to
loud.
tell you, when I start a mix, just because I'm a New Yorker, I got to hear my drums loud. It's definitely,
whoa.
yeah, we have to. I mean, in the beginning, but I think once I get to a point, it's weird. It depends on my mood, but once I get things sounding right, the drums and bass, I have a weird way of mixing. Like, I do the drums first, the bass, then I put the vocal in right away before I even put any of the instruments in. Because I feel like, especially if it's a vocal thing, if it's EDM, it might be a little bit different.
Right.
But once I get to a point where the mix is sitting right, it's, you know, I'm on the NS10s really low and, you know, maybe 60 decibels. I mean, it's nothing crazy. We could have a conversation. And then if I get bored, I crank it.
What do you monitor on?
NS10s and JBL LSR series mic.
Favorite plugins?
I don't use that many. Sound Toys for tone shaping. UAD for heavy lifting. The one EQ I use is the SSL Waves E channel, which is like the workhorse. Lately, I've been using a lot of the Slate stuff. Also, their reverb is phenomenal. Metric Halo and Isotope Trash 2 is like the secret weapon.
Isotope.
Yeah, I love that. If I want to hear something on small speakers, you do the multi-band saturation. It's a game changer.
You've got a reputation for being really good with clients. Can you share some tips with us about how you work with clients and how you deal with, let's say, clients that are not quite as polite as we need?
Well, I'm sure Dave went through a lot. So, I mean, we know that the hardest thing is to take criticism in the beginning. And I also feel like, you know, I guess it's quite different in California, but in New York, a lot of the studios were shutting down, and I feel like a lot of the kids weren't getting the experience that working with an engineer. And what I used to tell people was, it's not about what I'm doing in the room, it's the experience of watching an engineer and how they handle the clients. Because I started my career working at Puffy's studio. I've seen a lot, you know? So for me, I learned on how to deal with the clients. And if someone, most of the time, what really the best advice I can give is, artists are artists. They live that song. You're basically spending 8 hours on that song. They might have spent 2 months on the song. Yep. But what's key is to realize, like, when you get those mix changes, they blow it way out of proportion. And next thing you know, it's like, no, I just need this turned up a dB, you know? And it's really your reaction to them. Trust me, there's times that I want to bite someone's head off, and usually my manager is like, let me be the buffer, and they'll just send you this, you know? But it's really like, and being in the room, it's controlling the environment, you know? And I think that comes from assisting. That started with assisting. If everything worked, as you know, you had great assistants. If everything worked great, that was smooth, you know?
I really think sometimes it's just quicker to do it than to discuss it, you know?
Absolute, 1,000%.
Like, you can do a change in 2 seconds, and if people like it, they accept it. If they don't, they don't. And
I mean, I'm an artist, so technically sometimes, like, I think more like an artist. So if someone, like, says something that I feel like is off, like, I'll sometimes think about it too much, you know? And you're right. There's times that I'm like, you know what? This is going to take me 10 minutes out of my life, or sit here and wallow in that thought for like 20 minutes, you know? I just want to get it over with. So you're right.
I love the low end on your records. Can you share something with me that will change my life and help me get better low end?
Take chances. Don't be afraid to push the low end. Parallel compression, the more I was in the box, completely changed my outlook. And even about 4 or 5 months ago, which I'm going to be doing something on main stage tomorrow and Sunday where I'll explain it, I actually started to parallel my mixes. And what I would do, it's crazy. I have like 4 or 5 master faders going on. And what I did was I put a limiter on a parallel chain, which is basically the same feed that my master's getting. But I put like a K stereo from UAD to widen the parallel. And then I boost the crap out of the low end with like a back CQ plugin, and I blend that in, and it changed. I mean, it's pretty awesome what it does.
Wouldn't you say that one of the biggest mistakes that people make is, if you want your 808 or your bass to be louder, just do this. Just turn it up. It's a damn bass. If you want more bass, don't add bass. It's bass. Just turn it up.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of times I've fallen for that trap where all I had to do was turn it up, but I reached for the EQ and...
Well, especially now that everybody has the same tools. So, you know, lately, the last couple months, I've been working, you know, a lot on electronic music, and these guys are so particular about their sound that they spend so much time doing, you know, creating their sound design and spending time on the mix, that one thing you don't want to do is collapse what they have already. So there's an art to enhancing what they're doing. And, you know, sometimes it is as simple as just turning something up. They're like, dude, what did you just do to my 808? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you.
How important to you, because you had a self-determined path, How important do you think is education for people?
I'm a huge believer. I'm actually starting to create, and I've been working on it for 3 years, but I don't know when it's going to happen. I've been working on an online, like, mixing just from my philosophy, but instead of being so technical, I want it to be more of a how to put your feeling into a record the same way you would make a production or write a song. And I've always believed in education, because what I learned was when I was going to school, like I mentioned earlier, I interned right away, but it was easier for me to come back to school and be like, oh, that's what they were doing. Because I was leaving school at 1:15 and working till like 2 in the morning, going back to my apartment in the city, sleeping for 2 hours, and just coming into school. The teachers had no idea why I could answer all the questions while I was half asleep, you know?
Question.
Hey, Ariel. Thanks for doing this. So I want to ask you about that day where your summing box died. Suddenly you're in a panic. You have to finish your mix in the digital world for the first time. And you spend 30 hours sitting there doing this. Did you feel like you had to make like a bunch of tiny changes to bring it back to where you were comfortable using that summing box? Or was it like a psychological thing? Or like, did you really have to do things to kind of get it to vibe the same way?
It's a different workflow for sure, right? Like, for instance, like for now, when I get a session, the first thing that I do is once Matt preps it for me, I literally highlight everything. And because a lot of my processing's done on the master bus, so I highlight everything, and I clip gain everything down, maybe like 10 decibels, depending on how hot I get it. And I assume most of the time I get it hot. But I have a specific sheet I sent to clients that like explains how to do it. And that was the difference, because when I was summing, I didn't care. I just pushed it out. I had analog VU meters that I, was coming out of the summing box. I think they're both great. There's days that I miss it, but I'm also a control freak when it comes to mixes. Like, I literally have a setup in my hotel, and I'm starting a mix because I love the fact that I can be anywhere. But I kept referring to the album because I mixed. There was a group called Chitty Bang that was on EMI, and I did their album, and what I started doing was I mixed that analog summing. And I remember doing I don't know if you guys know who Bob Power is, who's like the OG, but like, I remember I did a panel with Bob, and he heard my mix, and he was like, dude, your low end sounds better than mine, which I was like, bullshit, like, that's Bob Power, like,
right.
Yeah. And that was the hardest thing. So I learned that if you start gaining down, and I depended so much on my master bus, and I can push things and boost things, the more headroom I gave myself inside the box, I was able to achieve that. It took time. I'm now to the point where I'm happy.
Okay, back there.
Yeah.
Handsome dude, jutting jaw, white shirt, rocket.
So I'm kind of like you, like to get the drums, bass, and vocals going first. I like to make everything kind of as fat and clean as possible, when I think of everything else as like supporting the vocal. But also at times, because I'm trying to make everything so fat and clean, I feel like it's hard to get a good loudness in the end. So what are some tricks that you do sometimes? Like, do you ever have to like pull the low end back down to get like an overall loudness in the end?
I don't. I'm aware of it right from the start. I'm super aware constantly. That's the mindset of being in the box that I had to get. It really is a mindset. So I'm aware right from the beginning. Like, the kick and the bass has the most information because of all the low end, below whatever, you could say 250, 300, whatever. So that's going to have the most information going into the master, right? So right from the beginning, the kick and the bass are the two most important things. So I'm looking at my master fader, and I'm seeing exactly what I need to do. And it is a visual thing at times, So right from the beginning, that's what I'm doing. And the reason I put the vocal in early is because I can add more frequencies into the vocal to make it stand out more. If you add everything later and then you put the vocal in, you're going to find yourself working backwards.
You're on.
You mentioned you had several lines of parallel compression that was running, and you had a limiter that was parallel to your master.
Keep it in front of you.
Sorry. But what other lines of parallel compression are you running?
Keep it in front of you.
Sorry, my hands.
It's all good, I got it.
Yeah.
So aside from that, and I don't always do the master. It doesn't always work, you know? It's not a one-trick pony. Like, a lot of times it'll be the kick drum. It'll be like, if the bass, I want to add some more low end and just, I feel like I can push it harder. Like, I love the back CQ that from UAD that I just, there's something about it because I had the hardware. That's what I used to run everything through.
So you're mashing the limiter really hard.
Not really. It's all about gain structure. So I am looking at, like, it's really understanding gain structure. That's really what it comes down to. That's ultimately what the difference was with, and now because of like the you know, everything is like 32-bit float and 64, it's quite different than it was when I was on Pro Tools 10, for instance.
Right.
You know? So it's just understanding headroom, and you got to understand that you got to be conservative. I don't like my faders looking really low on the, that drives me crazy. I'm really OCD about mixing. I like the stuff to look like it did on a console when I would mix on an SSL or a Neve.
Okay.
So between mixing or working with Imagine Dragons or working with TI, well, there's a swing in there. Was it the same thing? Was it?
It's always the same, I feel like. Yeah, it's the same. I always have people,
Yeah.
You know, I approach the mixes the same until you get into like, what do I need more of? And
right.
You know, you start to talk to yourself more, like, do I need more low end? But I started mixing less with I mix more with my heart now. It's more of a feeling, you know? It's really just, I stopped now, you know, where it used to take me 8 to 10 hours to mix, I could mix in about 4 to 5 hours. But what's cool, forget it, hold on, I'm not done there. I'll stop for the day, and then the next day I come in and I'll tweak again because I believe in fresh ears. You know, or I'll call somebody into the room and be like, hey, I call dumb ears, you know? Can you come listen to this and let me know what you think?
Question for you. When a producer or songwriter is giving you a mix to mix, do you prefer detailed notes with references, with certain, you know, pans and stuff, or do you like to kind of do your own thing and create your vision of it to match the demo?
I have a conversation with the client ahead of time, and the one thing that I really learn is that, and this is something, everybody likes to pan everything super wide, and when I get it now, what you don't realize is if you bring it in closer, it sounds fatter, and that's just something that I realized maybe within the last year. I don't even know how I overlooked that, you know, but it's, you know, every day you learn, you know? And I definitely, the one thing that drives me nuts is if I get like 8 or 9 references, they're like, you know, one part of the hook I want it to be like this, and then the other part that comes in on this bar, I want it to be like this, and I'm like, but that's not your record. Like, you can't give me a Radiohead hook and you know, you're doing a trap song, you know? Like, I don't understand what that means. But what happens is you have to study them, and you know, years of experience, you're like, oh, I know what they need to do, you know? And if you're not, it's all communication. I feel like the more you communicate with the client in a way that makes them feel comfortable, that's what they want. You got to make them feel comfortable.
What's the future hold? Where are you going? What are you doing? Continue to do the same thing?
I'm going to start training my 2-year-old to prep my mixes.
There you go.
You know,
You work from home? Or
let's just say I'm by next...
You're in between.
By this, no. I have a studio in Brooklyn, a mix room, and I'm actually building. It should be done. It's pretty much done. I'm waiting on the panels, and we're going to tune the room out. You know, but I'm building a new facility.
He's in construction hell. Is what he's trying to say.
No. The construction hell's over. That's great. You know, just don't do sheetrock yourself. Hire someone to do it. Yeah, I'm building something closer to home. Let's say that.
Right.
And it should be done within the next 2 weeks.
Oh, congratulations!
Hopefully. So I'm really happy because I just bought a house outside of the city, so. You know, trying to give my kid the life that I had.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it becomes, I miss New York City, but, you know, the good thing is, you know, it's beautiful, and I do want to say this, that, like, for a long time, New York was sort of dead, and now there's just, like, this beautiful revival, and there's, like, amazing engineers, and there's a really cool community of people. Some of them are here. And, you know, it's great because everyone's helping each other out, and they're realizing that that's the way to do it.
Brooklyn's on fire right now.
Brooklyn is ridiculous. I mean, the studios that are out there just, I mean, it's unbelievable. But I am going to keep my room there in Brooklyn. Okay. I did work out a deal to keep it. And so if I want to go back, I'm able to get away for
More questions, guys?
So you mentioned that you use the NS10s to monitor through.
Yep.
And
we have a love-hate relationship.
yeah, so I was going to ask you, because those speakers, you know, they're from the 80s and they're kind of designed different. What do you trust to hear, like when you're A-Bing?
One word.
I understand probably your ears, but with the low end on the NS10s, it's not really present. So
mid-range.
Yeah.
Mid-range. That's what it is. People try to. What happens is you do less mid-range. Believe it or not, it's when they're really mid-range. Like if you hear a mix on them, it's really just reference. I know Dave talks about it a lot on the show, like referencing. Like I loved, before I mix, I just listened. Like I'm a huge fan of Serban. Like that, Serban and Chad Blake is what got me to get into the box and feel comfortable. I mean, Serban, you listen to his records, and I mean, it's like one of the most consistent mixers of all time. Like it's crazy what he does. And I'm listening to mid-range. But I did learn a trick from an engineer that I used to work under that he used to said to me, just look at the way the woofer moves.
Yeah.
And then I knew. But I do use the, you know, the JBLs like for my low end.
Also, Ariel, tell me if you've ever done this. I started it subconsciously. Your question is assuming that the way to listen is to listen as if they were flat. Well, no speaker's flat. So if no matter what speaker you use, if you expect them to be perfectly flat, you're going to make a mistake. So what you do is you train your ear to listen to 80 cycles at 40 dB down. You see what I'm saying? So I EQ 808s on NS10s because I know where that 80 cycle should be in terms of the sound, right, Dave? And then you learn 40 and do this for me. Take your NS10s and low pass them, and you'll get down to 40 cycles, and you'll say, damn, this stuff's still coming out. Well, train your ear to hear that 40 at about, what, 60 dB down, Dave, would you say?
Yeah.
And then the mid-range is going to be a little bit emphasized, and that's a good thing because the Fletcher-Munson curve tells us that that's where all of our hearing is. Our hearing is designed to hear speech. And a lady is designed to hear a baby's cry, and so we have a need to hear that frequency very, very dramatically. And sometimes to make something sound louder, just add more mid-range, and it'll sound louder. So experiment with that concept, and I think it'll help you. It helped me because I used to have trouble going from one speaker system to another, and I didn't like going to another studio. And then someone taught me that technique, and now I can go anywhere in the world and pretty quickly learn the speakers. So try it; it might work. You know,
Thank you.
That. I know you know that.
One last question before we'll tell you what's going to go on tomorrow. Anybody else? Anybody else? Here we go.
Sub-frequency mixing, where you've got your kick, you have your 808, and you also may have a bass line. How difficult is that to do with those type of speakers, like especially the
EDM?
The LS?
The LS.
The JBLs.
Oh, I mean, honestly, once you know your speaker, you know your speaker. You know, like that's it takes time to get to know your speaker. But my rule is first to figure out what's more important. If you have like a trap record, what's more important, the kick or the bass, right? If you have a deep house record, what's more important, the kick or the bass? What's driving the record? You got to figure out what's driving the record. That's where people make it too complicated. You know what I mean? You just got to figure out what, you know, if you're mixing a jazz record, like, you know, it's a different feel. So you got to figure out what's the importance of the record.
Absolutely. The reason why I was asking, because I have my son here, Nico, and he does trap, obviously, a lot. So I'm trying to teach him how to use, you know, the difference between 808 being more present or prevalent than the kick.
I'll tell you one thing, and to end your question, the thing that I do now is I listen a lot on laptop speakers, because I've had a lot of these dance guys that come to me and they're like, I really needed to hit a certain way when the kids listen on the laptops.
Absolutely.
That's been the one game-changing thing for me in the way that I mix.
Yep.
You know, is the laptop. So I literally can listen, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
I can't sound like Steven Slate.
I'm hoping he gets a record deal. And please, a round of applause for a talented guy and our pleasure, Ariel Borujow.
Thank you so much.
Man, thank you. Really, thank you.